It was such a great experience in many different ways. This was actually my second time going to China, and the first time I was very, I guess culturally, very unaware and unprepared, even though I did read up on some things. I kept on using the word like, oh, that's weird, that's different, and didn't really evaluate, I didn't really see the beauty of Chinese culture the first time I went. But preparing to go this January was a lot different. The leaders really emphasized letting China speak for itself, which was really great, and having multiple perspectives about Chinese culture. And we even learned a little bit more about business and church and government and education and food, obviously. So kind of a holistic experience was really impactful for me. I would love to be a teacher and teach internationally, and there were so many opportunities on the trip to connect educationally. So we went to 2 different schools, one in a university, and just touring and seeing how big they are, and meeting with students, and then also meeting with teachers who are teaching English, who are Christians, and their goal is to organically build relationships with people and and then share Christ authentically through those relationships. And I thought that was really something that I want to do as well, using teaching as that mode of spreading the gospel. I think is really impactful and something that I'm going to take with me as I'm studying here at Taylor.
I think the persecuted church in China looks differently than a lot of Western Christians may think. One person in China stated it well, I think, or as well as I can understand, that persecution and fear of death or something like that is not a day-to-day occurrence for a normal Chinese Christian, but it definitely is different for a rural house church as opposed to an urban house church as opposed to a registered church. We went to a registered church in the middle of Beijing with a huge neon sign that said Christian Church, and they had ministries for women and for English learners, just like any big church in the United States would. And it was just kind of a wake-up call to see that and be like, okay, this is the Chinese church, but then hearing from a house leader, and this is also the Chinese church, and just kind of the complexity of China and how there is definitely persecution and people who say, please, don't say our names in this, and being aware of different things that are going on, but then also people who have big neon signs on their churches. So just being aware of the complexity that's in China, and just knowing how we can pray for both and just the different difficulties that both have. One thing that definitely stuck out to me from the China trip was visiting a Buddhist temple, and it was on a festival day, so there is huge crowds of people, and just seeing people so fervently in prayer to a huge Buddha with incense in the air and this beautiful architecture. It was definitely beautiful in a sense because you see just the passion of the human spirit and the beauty in the physical surroundings, but then it was also really heartbreaking to see people so passionate and so committed to something that we know is not true, and just the feeling of I can't do anything about this. But then I think through reflecting and talking to different people on the trip, just realizing this is a reality in the United States. There are people walking around that don't believe the truth, and we're more aware of it and hypersensitive to it when it's big and we're in a temple. But in the United States, the person sitting next to us could be an atheist or an agnostic or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim, and just treating those people with love and respect, but also just knowing that those people are seeking as well, and they're seeking just as much as the people in China are.
While I was in Belize, I experienced a lot of big firsts for being an education major. At the time, the longest I'd been in a classroom for a lab experience, besides just observing one full day, was just a fraction of a day, or let alone a fraction of a week. And so to go from like Tuesday or Thursday mornings from 8 to 11 to Monday to Friday 7 to 4 was a little bit of a shock, but gave me a lot of confidence in who I wanted to be as a teacher. It was like, okay, I like this schedule. I like being there before the kids get there, and I like being there when they leave. And so, yeah, living that like teacher schedule was very good to have before even heading into JUMP this semester in student teaching. Next year also prepared me a lot for just the lesson planning and scheduling. There was always like, okay, what are we doing tomorrow? How can I prepare tonight in a way that also gets me enough sleep? That was like really helpful, and being with all the other education majors in Dr. Sisson, just it was a really positive and helpful environment. There's something about like all being in one room planning your own lessons that is just pretty like life-giving, also helpful. Everyone has input that they can give, and so I really appreciated that. Yeah, I think then also it just reminded me how much I love being a teacher and how much I love the relationship atmosphere or aspect that comes with it. The kids just really change you, and you want to love them so much, and so knowing that you have a full month with them is really exciting because it is, again, different from past lab experiences, but also just reminds you how hard it is to say goodbye to them, and so I know that that will be even hard just going into a job that you're with them a whole year.
This is the first time I've left the country, so for me, recognizing that like this sounds ignorant because it is, but being American is not necessarily the right way, and to be somewhere else and to be able to see like, okay, they may do things differently here, and that's okay, and I want to try to fit to how the way they do things here. Be respectful of that. It was kind of a theme I remember just considering as I was seeing different things around me. As we were just exploring these places and reading about Paul's life and understanding some of the letters that he wrote and to who the people were, we were understanding that better. Just was very inspiring to me of Paul's dedication and just the call of like, this dude really meant what he says, and his life transformation was so cool. So understanding some more of the details of his story and places he went, getting to see those places, understand those cultures, just has given me a whole lot of confidence in my own faith and my own self of like, this is the most important thing in my life is my faith. It clearly was in Paul's life. We should be looking a lot different in how we live. It's just like the radical ideas like that he had, at least of the day. Like we're so used to the idea of like loving your enemy and loving your wives and wives loving your husbands, because we're used to that now. But in that time, like marriage was not something that was built on love. It was built on strengthening the city and strengthening this like community type thing. And so marriage was not something where love was the priority. If you were married and in love, that was just kind of a bonus. And so for Paul to say that this was something that everyone who's married needs to be doing was a radical idea. And also just to love your enemies was something that was very radical. I mean, Paul had plenty of people that didn't like him, didn't like what he was saying, to the point that he was in prison and even killed for it. And yeah, I just thought that was cool that he was saying they're accepted now, but like at the time in those cultures they were very controversial.
During the Greece and Italy trip, meals were super important, and so you were all in a big group going and touring these different cities, but you would always sit down for lunch and dinner in these huge groups, and you'd always sit with someone different. And so I know I really enjoyed being just poured into by leaders during meals. That it wasn't unusual just to be you and another student and a professor, and for 40 minutes to be able to commune and dine together, and then they would share their story and then share a lot of times love advice, because that's just what happens, but they would share their story and then listen to ours and be able to impart that on our life. And so I know I've enjoyed that long-term relationship with professors now and leaders on the trip now, that yes, we shared 3 weeks together and we shared a couple meals together, but because of those relationships that were formed over meal times, that those were able to transcend. We really connected a lot with our waitresses and waiters that would serve at these huge group dinners that we would have, and just getting to even connect and make those connections, and then make those on Facebook as well, and continue those relationships with Nick and with Clara and with John. And so being able to kind of step out of our comfort zone interculturally and realize that yes, we're Taylor students that do have stories and testimonies, but then being able to kind of take that seat interculturally and listen to someone else's story, whether it be someone in a school or a street vendor or a restaurant, really stretched me interculturally to see that there are a lot of different languages, and even if we didn't speak their language of Greek or of Italian, that smiles and laughs and jokes and kindness don't have a language. I have a general idea of what I want to do with my life, but Greece and Italy really helped me see, just educationally see the gospel up close, like I said, but then that the gospel, especially looking at Paul's life, that the gospel shouldn't just be a factor of my life. And that's something that we say a lot, but that it's not like I'm going to go be a HR manager at a company and then be an HR manager who's a Christian, but instead, vocationally, if I really do believe what I say I believe, that that the gospel should be the driving factor, and I should be someone who is passionate about Jesus, and then that seeps into every area of my life, that it isn't compartmentalized or isn't something that just shows up, but instead is the backbone like behind every single thing I do, and that it shouldn't be held back, but instead should transform the way I talk and interact and listen well. And yeah, that I think vocationally, no matter where I end up or what I end up doing, that we're called to live radically and not blend in at all.
Sarah and I, a friend, sat next to each other when we went out to a restaurant that specialized in serving guinea pigs. And so we sat next to each other, we dared each other, and so we broke off a little arm of a guinea pig and we just like held it and then just ate it, the little paw, which still have like, I just remember the feeling of like fingernails stuck in my teeth, and that was kind of gross. But that was super memorable, and I can now say it's the most exotic thing that I've ever eaten. In terms of work itself, I think I grew a lot into how to work with other teams, because our teams were divided up even amongst ourselves. And so to have each, like, so we were working on an app for our church, and the app required, we had 3 distinct teams, I guess 4. One was dealing with a lot of server side, and then the 3 other teams were dealing with different modules that we could implement into our app. And within each team we had functional groups where I was part of the API team, and so I and another partner would be working on APIs and making sure everything patched really nicely and seamlessly between the front end and the back end people who were working within my team. And so I think I really liked how that was organized, and was able to see how different people work and different people wanted certain things, or even how they asked questions on how to get to where they wanted to.
Something that I think was super cool and especially awesome about our trip is just I felt like our team meshed really well. We got along really well. We grew pretty close to each other, and I think part of that was the fact that our group got to know each other in the months leading up to our trip. We met together frequently. We prayed over one another. We had prayer partners, and so all the way leading up to the trip was preparing for the trip and getting to know each other and praying for one another. And so then by the time we left and got to the Philippines, we'd already been praying for each other and getting to know each other for months. And then we weren't just jumping into ministry with strangers. We were jumping into ministry with people that we'd been prayerfully preparing for a month spending with them. And so I felt like that was huge for our trip and for our team. Spiritually, it was incredible. I grew so much from getting to experience the spiritual component of just God's church overseas. I've done missions before to Haiti and Kenya, but it's incredible anywhere you go to see God's work and God's people and His church. Like there's incredible things and incredible work that's being done there. Just being able to see the church and how they're growing there and their faith there. The Philippines is a place of poverty and where they have so much less than we have here, and specifically in the places that we were at and outside of Manila, Philippines. And it's just incredible to see the faith of the people there and how much trust they have in God and how much joy they have despite their circumstances, and despite how little they have, their faith and their joy and what they do have is incredible. And that's an incredible way that I grew, was just seeing them and experiencing that.
I think being able to go for like almost 3.5 weeks made a big difference. Being able to stay right in the community we were serving in just like allowed us to feel like we were more a part of everything and not just like outsiders coming in. And also, yeah, so just being able to be right with the people and realize that the church truly is like a global church, that we can be on a plane for 14 hours and still be like with our sisters and brothers in Christ. So I'd say that was the biggest thing, just kind of like being there for a longer time, being right in there, being able to make relationships with these other Christians. One of the things I remember the most is on the last day, someone taught the kids to say "see you in heaven" instead of goodbye, which sounds like a little bit morbid to begin with, but when you think about it, like we were all sad that we were leaving, the kids were sad that we were leaving, and I must have been one of the other Taylor students kind of jokingly said "see you in heaven," and all the little kids started yelling that to us. And I just think that was, like, looking back on it, really powerful. Like, we might not ever make it back to Manila, but we're gonna get to be with all these people again one day. So I think that, yeah, just realizing, like, no matter where we go in the world, we have people that we're connected to by our faith. One of my favorite parts of the Philippines trip was that we went to school all day, and then after school you had the option of going on a feeding, going to the orphanage, going to play basketball with the kids in the street, or staying at the compound where we were staying, and there was a pool there. It has 2 slides and a diving board, and like a really cool pool. So all of the kids would line up at the gate. As soon as they got out of school, they'd be at the gate and asking if we were gonna swim that day. And I love water, love swimming, and a lot of my students were asking me throughout the day, like, swimming today? And so they wanted to know if they could come swim, because that's not an opportunity or something they get to do very often. So I ended up being kind of like the head swimming person, and I was out there every single day, just making sure if heads went down, they came back up. And I got to get in and swim with some of the students and like help teach them how to swim and help catch them as they went down the slide, and just to be able to make that other connection outside of class, where when I went to school the next day, I could be like, hey, like, remember when you went down the big slide? Like, that was so cool. Or like talk if they were gonna come swim that evening, and just like be able to kind of have like a fun time